The 1950s are often remembered as a golden age, a time of steady jobs, strong families, and simple happiness. Old photographs, black and white television shows, and nostalgic memories paint a picture of security and comfort. But for millions of working-class families, the reality of life in the 1950s was far more complicated and far harder than most people imagine today. In this video, we take a deep, honest look at what working-class life was really like in the 1950s. Beyond the myths and romanticized memories, from long hours and dangerous jobs to cramped homes, limited opportunities, and daily financial stress, this is the side of the decade that rarely gets talked about. The post-war boom of the 1950s is often seen as a time of widespread prosperity. But this prosperity didn't reach everyone equally. For many working-class families, life was a constant struggle. Wages were often low, barely covering the essentials, and the idea of savings was a distant dream. Most households lived paycheck to paycheck, with every penny carefully accounted for. There was no financial cushion. A single missed week of work, whether due to illness or a temporary layoff, wasn't just an inconvenience, it could plunge a family into genuine hardship, forcing them to rely on credit from local shopkeepers or loans from neighbors just to put food on the table. The jobs that sustained these families were physically punishing and frequently dangerous. The backbone of the working-class economy was manual labor. Men toiled in factories, descended into coal mines, loaded and unloaded ships at the docks, or built the nation's new infrastructure on construction sites. The romanticized image of the sturdy, reliable worker often masks the brutal reality of these roles. Safety regulations that we take for granted today were either minimal or poorly enforced. Injuries were a constant risk, from minor cuts and burns to life-altering accidents. Compensation for injury, if available at all, was often limited, leaving workers and their families to bear the financial burden of a workplace accident. For many, this life of hard labor began at a startlingly young age. It was common for boys to leave school and enter the workforce as teenagers, following their fathers and grandfathers into the same factories and mines. The expectation was to work, and to work hard. Long hours were not the exception. They were the norm. A standard workweek was often just the beginning, with overtime frequently expected, not offered as an option. Refusing to work extra hours could put your job at risk. Despite the illusion of post-war stability, job security was fragile. The threat of being laid off loomed large, a constant source of anxiety. While trade unions existed and fought for better conditions, their protections were not universal, and many workers still found themselves vulnerable to the whims of their employers. The burden on working-class women was immense and often invisible. Many women juggled the dual responsibilities of paid work and running the entire household. Their jobs were typically in low-paid sectors like textiles, cleaning, or retail roles that were crucial to the economy but consistently undervalued. After a full day of work, they came home to a second shift, cooking, cleaning, and caring for children, all without the modern conveniences that would later ease domestic labor. The contribution of children was also a vital part of the family economy. Formal child labor was less common than in previous eras, but it was far from rare for children to engage in informal work, running errands, delivering papers, or helping with piecework at home to bring in a few extra shillings. For many, schooling ended early. The need to contribute to the family income often took precedence over education, limiting their future opportunities, and perpetuating a cycle of manual labor from one generation to the next. The homes these families returned to were a world away from the spacious suburban houses depicted in magazines. Most working-class housing was small, crowded, and lacked basic amenities. Poor insulation made them cold and damp, a constant battle against the elements. An indoor toilet was not yet a universal feature. Many families still relied on an outhouse at the end of the yard. Central heating was an unimaginable luxury for the vast majority. The heart of the home, and its primary source of heat, was the coal fire. Winters were harsh, with family members huddling together in one room to stay warm. The chore of fetching coal and cleaning out the grate was a daily ritual, and the air was often thick with soot and smoke. The kitchen, often the center of family life, was similarly basic. At the start of the decade, refrigerators were uncommon. Perishable food had to be bought daily from local shops and stored in a cool pantry or larder. This shaped the family diet, which was simple, repetitive, and heavily influenced by the rationing of the war years. Meat was a treat, reserved for a Sunday roast if the family could afford it, not a daily staple. Dishes were built around cheap, filling ingredients like potatoes, bread, and root vegetables. Nothing was ever wasted. Leftovers from one meal were ingeniously transformed into the next, a testament to the resourcefulness required for survival. This make-do and mend philosophy extended to everything. Clothes were not disposable items, but valuable assets. They were repaired, patched, and handed down from older children to younger ones until they were completely worn out. A new set of clothes was a major expense, often saved for special occasions like Christmas or Whitsun. Laundry was another backbreaking task. Washing was done by hand in a tub or sink, or with a basic, manually operated machine like a mangle or a pauser. The weekly wash was an all-day affair. Bath time often involved a tin tub being brought into the kitchen and filled with water heated on the stove, with family members taking turns using the same water. In such crowded living conditions, privacy was a luxury few could afford, with multiple children often sharing a single bed. Entertainment was simple and centered on the home and the local community. In the early 1950s, television was still a novelty and far too expensive for most working-class families. The radio remained the primary source of news, music, and entertainment, its broadcasts providing a shared cultural experience for millions. Family pastimes were low cost, playing cards, reading library books, or gathering for a sing-along around the piano, if a family was fortunate enough to have one. Holidays, if they happened at all, were rarely glamorous. They usually consisted of a day trip to the nearest seaside town or a short stay with relatives. The idea of a foreign holiday was completely out of reach. This local existence was partly due to the fact that very few working-class families owned a car. The automobile was still a symbol of middle-class status and financial freedom. For the working class, daily life depended entirely on public transport. Buses and trains were essential lifelines, connecting people to their workplaces, to shops, and to family. This reliance on public transport reinforced the rigid social class boundaries of the era. Where you lived, how you traveled, and the clothes you wore were all visible markers of your station in life. For many, opportunities for upward mobility felt severely limited. There was a pervasive sense that you were destined to follow in your parents' footsteps, trapped in the same kind of work and the same kind of life, with little hope of breaking the mold. The immense psychological toll of this existence was rarely acknowledged. The concept of mental health as we understand it today did not exist. Stress, anxiety, and exhaustion was simply considered part of life, something to be endured in silence. There was no vocabulary for discussing depression or trauma. Men, in particular, were expected to be stoic and uncaring. As a result, many sought escape in the few ways available to them. Pubs were central social hubs, and alcohol was a common way to numb the pain and exhaustion of a hard week's work. Smoking was also widespread among both men and women, marketed as a sophisticated and relaxing habit, with little public awareness of the devastating long-term health consequences. When physical illness struck, it could be catastrophic. While the newly formed National Health Service provided access to care, medical treatments were more basic, and taking time off work meant an immediate loss of income. A serious illness could quickly drain a family's meager resources and push them into poverty. Despite these immense hardships, it's crucial to remember the powerful sense of community that defined working-class life. In a world without a strong social safety net, neighbors relied on each other for survival. They shared food, loaned money, looked after each other's children, and provided support during times of crisis. There was a deep-seated pride in hard work, a resilience forged in the face of adversity, and a collective identity built on shared struggle and mutual support. This was not a golden age of easy living. It was an era of grit, endurance, and quiet dignity. The reality of the 1950s for the working class was far tougher, far grittier, and far more complex than our sepia-tone nostalgia often allows. Did you or your family live through the 1950s? Share your memories or stories in the comments, we'd love to hear them. Like the video if you enjoy honest history. Subscribe for more forgotten realities of everyday life. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode.